All right, testing, testing, 1, 2, 3, testing. Are we live? It looks like we are. How you doing, Chris?
Okay.
I'm not well myself. I think I got some kind of stomach bug or something. I'm not gonna lose my lunch or anything, but I'm just hoping I don't have to leave every half an hour to go to the bathroom, you know what I mean?
Oh. Hmm.
But this is the last possible night we can do this because it is, well, I mean, depending on what time zone you're in, I guess it is last minute, literally, because it's the 30th, so
Mm.
I'm just not going to be
Just
100%.
mm.
And
just
just
don't
all
watch
this
Forensic
past,
File.
all this
Just don't
past
watch
week, Heather
Forensic.
and I had spent all day in the hospital because of her pains. Then they don't even send her home with anything. She ended up getting something from her doctor a couple days later, and she's not 100% from that. She's gone back to work, but the pain still kind of comes and goes. And now I got this.
Mhm.
So what's been going on with you, Chris?
Not much. Just mm, kind of. I don't know. I don't know how to explain it. I'm just meh.
Well, we are streaming on Rumble because Fighting Zen is already in. Yeah, he's talking about Rebecca Watson, who is someone I used to call a friend. But
Who?
Rebecca Watson, she was kind of at the forefront of that when the whole Atheism Plus thing started. Do you remember Elevator Gate?
Yeah.
That was her.
Mm.
No one on YouTube yet. Anyone watching on YouTube, type in the chat. Odyssey as well. We should be going on all three. I hope we're going on all three. I put all three in the thumbnail. Hope you like the new thumbnail. Been playing around with this cartoon version of me, and I did a couple studies on the YouTube thumbnails. And when I use the cartoon version of me in the thumbnail, I get 10% more views. And of the views, people watch like 10 to 15% more of the video. So just from having a different dude in the thumbnail. Am I just that ugly or what?
Mm.
Yeah, he's posting links on the distrust of science. And I mean, it's a shame, but they got no one to blame but themselves. You know, they basically politically took over academia. And he's talking about
Mm.
the claim that left-wing violence is a myth. And
Oh yeah. I hate it when people say that, and it's like we literally have videos of left wing activists rioting. Or do those people
I
not
mean, what
count?
what was 2020 all about?
Yeah, exactly.
We are going on YouTube, right? We usually have a couple of
Yeah.
comments by
I just
now.
don't see a lot of. I just don't see anyone. Maybe I'll
Okay.
refresh.
Is that it? Is
Oh,
my chat
excuse me.
dead?
Mm, pretty much.
I am not seeing anyone. Okay.
Must just be on Rumble tonight. Oh, someone called filler spot.
Okay. Would you ever run for Congress? No. No, no, no,
No.
no, no. I'm not dipping my toe in that pool.
Honestly, even if you did, you probably wouldn't get elected. I mean, look at Brandon Herrera. He's a much bigger YouTuber than you. He's got more money, more resources, much more influence. He was really popular, and he still failed.
Yeah.
It's funny because some left wing YouTubers were making fun of him because he failed. It's like, listen, people, it's unless you're an insider or know people on the inside, your chances of getting a nomination to potentially run for an election are slim to nil, let alone actually win.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The only reason I would is just because it would be a platform to get the message out on the campaign.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, like, so many people are like, what can the president do? What can the president do to change and end all the spending? And the sad reality is that other than bring attention to it, the president can't do anything about spending. That's Congress.
Well, he has some discretionary spending he can move around, but that's it.
Yeah. I don't know.
And depending on how Congress assigned to him, I guess he could just decide to put the spending back into the Treasury.
Yeah.
But like people were talking about the USAID thing, the USAID, the way that worked is Congress said spend this much on foreign aid. And so then the administration said, okay, we're going to create this USAID thing and spend it through that. So you can go through and cut all of that, but you still got to spend it because Congress says spend it on foreign aid. So you got to find something else to spend it on.
Yeah. I do know one thing a president can do, because, so many people say, so many people say when a president says he'll do something about taxes, remember, there's nothing he can do about that. There actually is something, and I brought this up, that he can theoretically do, and it's actually very simple. Simple. Just pardon anyone who's been arrested for federal income tax evasion or whatnot.
There you go.
Yeah. Just say, yes, I can't set the tax rules, but here's the thing, Congress, I ain't enforcing them, so... I mean, really, if I recall correctly, that's actually how Gary Johnson kind of got New Mexico to be libertarian for a little bit, even though he technically doesn't have the power to implement the financial stuff. He just said, look, I just made myself impossible to work with by basically every time the state Congress came forward with something, I'd say no to it.
Yep, it was governor veto.
Yep, just... I do kind of wish the president did have some veto power over spending, because that could probably help, keep some of the reckless spending in check.
Yeah, there was talk like in the 90s of giving the president a line item veto, and it never went anywhere.
Yeah.
Because it would require a constitutional amendment.
Yep. Which would take away power away from Congress, and...
Yeah.
It's so funny. Everyone loves to hate on the president for abusing his power, but very few people actually aim at Congress, because...
Well, like we were talking about with the USAID funding, all the Republicans in Congress were like, oh yeah, that's great. He's cutting spending. And then Thomas Massey in the House and Rand Paul in the Senate were introducing bills. Okay, let's make those cuts permanent. And a lot of the Republicans just didn't vote for them.
Mm.
What rules should be in place regarding child actors? It's funny how the child labor laws don't seem to apply to Hollywood, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I get that you're really contracting with the parents and it's up to the parent to make sure there's no abuse, but my God, what so many of them go through.
Yeah, I think it was Macaulay Culkin, didn't he have to sue his own parents because he found out they were stealing money from him?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or even worse, all the stuff that Jeanette McCurdy went through.
Oh, yeah.
Considering the title of her book was, what was it? I'm Glad My Mom Died or something like that?
Oh, yeah, because her mom was abusive and basically groomed her to be an actress because she failed. Yeah.
And was basically handing her off to these powerful men to pass around for their own enjoyment to help get these roles.
Oh, yeah, yep. Yep, and she got her foot massaged by Dan Schneider.
The implication is Schneider did a lot worse to her.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I mean they recently did a short documentary series about Nickelodeon and you know some of the shady stuff that was going behind some of those live action things.
Yeah, I missed that one.
Yeah. Well, it's on Amazon and you gotta buy it, so
Uh,
yeah.
what's it called?
Oh, I forgot what it was called. I'll have to hang on.
Yeah, I mean, just the whole Hollywood system is just so corrupt, and there doesn't seem to be a whole lot you can do about it.
Quiet on set, the dark side of kids TV.
Uh,
Yeah.
how can we make it easier for middle class people to run for Congress? You'd basically have to change the whole system.
Yep. Oh yeah. I actually watched that. I actually watched a cringy video by Mr. Beat where he did it on Citizens United for Supreme Court case, and you know what he titled it? He titled it "Why the Rich Can Legally Buy Congressional Votes." You know,
That's not
Stossel
what.
did it.
No, that's whenever
Yeah,
you run into someone like that, ask them to tell you what was actually the behavior that was banned. I guarantee you they won't be able to do it.
yep. Also, John
A small
Stossel
group
did a
of
pretty good.
people got together and pooled their money to make a documentary critical of Hillary Clinton. And because of the campaign finance laws, they said that because it was during the election cycle, they weren't even allowed to put it on pay-per-view. And it was such a blatant First Amendment violation. But if you ask the people critical of them, they don't know anything about that.
Yep. Another thing too that people say that is they say, yeah, without campaign finance reform, you know, what is going to stop big corporations from using their vast wealth and resources to buy ads in all the elections? It's like, well, John Stossel did a good video when he was doing a short where he covered, you know, McCain-Feingold, and he showed how this was an actual example about how Congress was actually using, you know, the campaign finance laws to stop small people from running.
Yeah, I'm mostly letting people read findings in for themselves, but there is one thing you said. Dan Schneider is a lot worse than John Kricfalusi in terms of being an abusive pedophilic mental case. I hadn't heard any of that about Kricfalusi.
He basically he took on a 16-year-old girlfriend, and he did abuse her though, but
But depending on what state you're in, that's not pedophilia.
yeah.
In North Carolina,
Well,
that'd be perfectly legal. That's the age of majority here.
Yeah, basically from what I understand, he, like, you know, there were a lot of female artists, you know, that he hired, and then he would basically form a relationship with her, and then he would say, and by the way, if you leave me, I'll fire you and make sure you never get a job in art again, you know.
Wow.
Yeah. Though the sad reality is that unfortunately that happens a lot in the entertainment industry, you know. I mean, I've seen interviews with celebrities that have been on podcasts and all, and they say that's kind of basically the open secret within Hollywood. The public doesn't know about it, but if you're running for it, you know in the back of your mind that at some point you're gonna have to perform a sexual favor for someone because sadly that's just how it is, you know.
But that's just what
And it's
makes
not
it
just
weird when you can do. I think this was the case with Justin Roiland, and it sounds like it might be the case with Neil Gaiman as well, that the accusations against them were just completely 100% unfounded, and they basically get blacklisted for doing what it's an open secret that is actually happening in Hollywood all the time.
Yep.
It's just weird.
Yep. And you know, some people are even making fun of like Corey Feldman because he wants to do that documentary on exposing, you know, pedophilia. pedophiles within Hollywood. And like so many people are saying, well, where is it? Why aren't you releasing it yet? And basically, from what I understand, he says he has it mostly completed and he would love to release it. The problem is that, and this is the thing people got to remember, these are really powerful people, and unless you have, hundreds of millions of dollars and a lot of money, which, although he is relatively wealthy, Corey Feldman doesn't have that kind of resources. You can't release something like that without risking getting sued to bankruptcy.
Yeah, you basically need your own legal team.
Yeah, you need your own legal team of army, and look, Corey Feldman may be famous, but the fact is, the matter, as an adult, he hasn't been as active in Hollywood as he was when he was younger, so he just doesn't have that resources. And so maybe people are like,
And also
Harvey
he said he needed to, put things in place for his physical safety as well. Because apparently a lot of them won't just limit themselves to going at you legally.
Yep. And so many people are like, but Harvey Weinstein, we caught him. Yeah, one guy. He was only, all the people that were coming forward were only aiming one guy, but Corey Feldman is going to go after multiple people. And like we just said, you can get away with catching one or two guys in a row, but when you get them all together and put their careers in line, you bet your ass they're going to pull their resources together and they're going to figure out, okay, we've got to get rid of Corey Feldman. We got to get our legal team together and let's sue him till he's broke. These are powerful people.
This is saying it's quite on the set, The Dark Side of Kids TV. This is saying this is a series.
Yeah, it's a short docuseries. Like, it's one of those things where it's like there's 45 minutes long where they have interviews with actors that worked on all that. And
okay, like a mini series.
Yeah, mini series. Yeah.
Okay, I'll check that out.
Also, Shane, with entertainment, this kind of goes into what you've been saying. You know what actually make them, the entertainment industry much less corrupt and actually give artists much more independence? Getting rid of copyright laws.
Yeah, that would do it.
Yeah, because that's another thing, going back to Nickelodeon, that's another thing we hear about Nickelodeon and Disney Channel and Cartoon Network that's difficult to work for as if I recall correctly, they literally have it in their contract that says anything you create while you're clocked in automatically belongs to the company. So if you have this really great idea, for a TV show, and you pitch it to Nickelodeon or whatever, and they say no, it's terrible, we don't like it. So then you're like, well, then I'm going to go to a different producer. I'm going to try it again. They're going to say, hey, you can't create that character. We own it.
Yeah, it's called work for hire.
Yep.
It's how most art works.
Yeah.
You sign everything over. I think the only exception is if you're a songwriter. You never lose your songwriter rights.
Yep.
But you can lose recording rights, which is why Taylor Swift had to re-record her entire catalog to get the rights back, because she lost the rights to the recording, but she still had songwriter rights.
Yep.
So she could do that. Just remember, we work in a copyright system where John Fogerty was sued for plagiarizing John Fogerty.
Yep. Yeah. That's why I disagree with Razorfist on when he did his video about copyright, where he says the reason why famous, classic characters like the Shadow and El Zorro disappeared is because their copyright expired and now they're in the public domain. No, that's not why they disappeared. It's just trends changed, and by the time characters like them in theory became popular again, we had these tough copyright laws, and now studios don't want to touch it because they're like, well, we might get sued.
Well, and the thing is, when you've got something like that, it's not just the copyright. I guarantee you, like the Shadow, I'm not sure about Zorro because I think it was a book originally, but I'm pretty sure the Shadow would have a trademark on it.
Well, yeah.
Plus,
true,
I thought it was only until like recently it came out of copyright.
Yeah, and that's another thing too. Just because something comes out of copyright, like a perfectly good example is a lot of Disney fairy tales. It's like, yeah, there's a lot of fairy tales out there that are technically within the public domain, but the reason why we don't see a whole lot of plays on them is because many people are afraid that Disney's going to turn around and say, "Hey, your version of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, it's way too similar to our version. We're suing you."
The
So
Shadow
it's like,
is
yeah,
not in the public domain.
what?
Condé Nast owns the rights to The Shadow. It's not in the public domain.
Oh, yep. Yep. And you want to know?
Now,
And you want to know
the
something?
initial character it was based on is in the public domain, but that's very different than the character you see in the comic.
Yep. 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 If you try to make a movie or a TV show based off of the Shadow, yeah, the Shadow may be in the public domain, but the copyright owner could say, "Hey, that movie's too similar, to this Shadow book, so you're violating copyright."
Which one was first, the comic or the radio series?
The radio series.
Do you know what year that started?
And I think before, and I don't remember, and I think before that it was actually books.
Yeah, but apparently the books are very different.
Yeah. Yep, and I'm sorry, people, but people always talk, well, what's going to stop, our art from being quote unquote stolen? It's like, people, art gets stolen even with copyright. In fact, copyright is often used as a way to steal art.
1930.
Yeah.
So let's see.
That's how Bob Kane
next
took...
year? Would that be next year?
Maybe, I don't know. But yeah, using copyright to steal other artwork, that's literally how Bob Kane stole Batman from Bill Finger.
That's happened a lot of times. And apparently that is something that happens a lot in Hollywood as well.
Yeah, that's the thing people need to realize is that listen, people, these patent and copyright offices, they don't do meticulous research. They don't hear both sides out and come to the conclusion. It's literally first come, first service. Someone comes to them with an idea or a patent and they don't see it in the record, it's automatically assigned to them. So yeah, for all we know, that patent or that copyright, or that script, it could have been stolen from someone else, but you know what? It's too late. Doesn't matter.
And there's stories like that one Deep Space Nine episode where Colin Meaney's character O'Brien is like falsely accused of something by this alien race, and they have to have a trial for it. That had been written years earlier by a guy who had submitted the script for Deep Space Nine. Brannon Braga basically stole his script, turned it into an episode of Voyager, and claimed copyright on it. And the guy had to spend like 3 or 4 years suing to get the rights back, and so that it could properly be made into a DS9 episode.
Yep.
But the thing is, if you don't have a whole bunch of lawyers to do that, a lot of times you're just out of luck.
Yeah, I've had conversation with on other channels with artists about copyright and like seriously, everyone I talk to who are for it either haven't read the copyright rules or they resort to the barking cat fallacy where they're saying, well, yeah, our current copyright system is bad, but we just need to reform it, that's all, and get a better organization in place. Yeah. Okay. So.
Well, yeah, I was having this one conversation on X with one guy, and every time I would corner him on something, he would always say, well, I agree that the term is too long and we should, pull it back. 95 years is too long, 70 years after the... But it was on points that had nothing to do with how long it had been.
Yep.
But that was just kind of his fallback talking point. Plagiarism is another one. As if there were no copyright, there'd be nothing you could do about plagiarism, even though that's a different thing entirely.
Yep. Yeah, I mean... it's kind of fun. It's kind of funny. It's kind of funny about plagiarism and all that is that plagiarism in a way kind of exposes the biggest flaw with American school systems. It's like It's like, well, I don't get it. Why is it considered plagiarism even though I still came to the right answer? And it's like, well, because you just took it, you copied it, you didn't learn it, and you didn't engage in critical thinking. And I'm like, and part of me looking back now thinks it's like, oh, so that's the issue. It's not about teaching us practical knowledge gathering skills. It's all about quote unquote critical thinking, which to be fair is not a bad skill to have. The problem is that it's got to be used correctly,
Well, they don't actually teach you critical thinking.
Yeah.
They don't teach you the methods of rationality or anything like that.
Yeah.
And they certainly don't exercise it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's actually,
unless your class is
there's-
giving you the demon haunted world as a textbook.
Yep. Yeah, there was this one like short that was like that aired in the 90s on Nickelodeon. I forgot who. I think it was The Adventures of Pete and Pete. And Pete once made his teacher baffled when he asked them when is long division ever going to come in handy in the real world, and the teacher can't think of a reason. Yep, that's the biggest thing ever.
Yeah.
Some teachers say math is absolutely important. We can't run our lives without math. It's like, yes, that is true, but when you actually break it down, 99% of all math that's practically utilized is basic math.
Well, and even then, they're not doing it in the way you're being taught in schools.
Yeah.
And they tried to fix it with Common Core and just made it even more ridiculous.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we're gonna teach you how to subtract 20 minus 10 by adding 2 5s and 5 2s and whatnot.
I like how like the mathematicians I know, and everyone gets into all these debates about PEMDAS and the order of operations and everything. The mathematicians I know say that in the real world, they don't care about PEMDAS because if you've gotten to the point where you have to use it to figure out how to do it, you've done a bad job of communicating the problem.
Yep.
And that's the problem with all these weird ones where, they try to do 2x, and is 2x a grouping, or does it count as multiplication that we should done, and all these ambiguous things. In the real world, whenever you're given a math problem, there's going to be a context to it. There's going to be a reason why you're doing it that way. There's always going to be something you can go back to resolve the ambiguity.
Yep.
And if you're ever at the part where something like that matters, then you've done a bad job communicating it.
Yeah. I think one cringy thing I remember seeing when we were watching this one, how sometimes in school they like to show you educational short films and all this. They were trying to show how math, applies to real life, and it shows a kid going to the store, and the store's having a sale, and it says it's 25% off, and they're like, see, this is when you might need to learn how to use percentages and decimals. But here's the thing: if anyone who knows in the real world goes, here's the thing: if they tell you there's a sale and something's 25% off, most of the time they have what the new price is on the sticker.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they put the sale price on there, yeah.
Yeah. Let's say if they're selling if they're having a 50%, if soda bottles are 50% off, they'll usually say was, $5 is now $2.50. They say something like that.
Or they'll also have the special price, like if you're a well, at my wife's store, it's called a Vic card, but whatever it is, the store card where you give them all your private information and your firstborn and everything. And then you get these little discounts, and they'll say right on there what the discount is.
Yep. And that's another thing too I hate about some people is when they act like, automation and having calculators on our phones, they're acting like that's making us dumber because we're not using our skills. It's like, no, we're just not wasting our time,
Yeah, we can spend our time and mental energies on something else.
Yeah. That's one thing I like. This one Irish YouTuber called Sergeant Ducky. That's one funny thing that he did one time where he's like, oh, and to all my messages and to all my teachers who told me, well, you need to show your math work because you won't have a calculator with you all the time. Then he has his character, because he's an anime character, pull out his phone going, ha!
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jack up the regular price and reduce it. Yeah, we was 25% off after we raised the prices 30%.
Yeah. Yeah, you actually can't do that, you know. Yeah, contrary to popular belief, you know, the government doesn't let big businesses do everything. Like, it reminds me of GameStop with the pump and dump scam, you know, where people justified themselves by saying, well, we're just doing what big corporations do to us all the time. And many people, including some legal advisors, say, listen, there's a lot of stuff that you can get away with if you're a super rich Wall Street person. Pumping and dumping ain't one of them. That is one thing that Congress absolutely will go after you for, no matter
Yeah.
what. Oh, and speaking of money in Congress, I'm going back to what I was saying about campaign finance reform. I know a very easy way, you know, a super wealthy person can still get past, you know, campaign finance reform, even if we didn't have Citizens United, and it's very simple. See, people are like, well, but corporations aren't people, so therefore they shouldn't be allowed to give money to Congress. Simple. The CEO will take the money and give it as a personal donation. The money will come from the corporation, but it's coming from him, so it's technically an individual.
Well, there's no limit on how much the candidate can spend on his own campaign.
Yeah.
And that's always the case. Donald Trump could have put his entire fortune into it if he wanted to or felt he needed to.
Yep. Some people are saying there should be a rule that says if a politician, you know, is a member of a company or some other organization, they need to resign if they swear office. But if I recall correctly, they kind of do that already.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like the energy secretary I was just talking about, he stepped down from his position on the board of Oklo.
Yeah.
I really hope that tech goes forward, though. It is so cool.
One thing I really want to ask many of those senators and all that, though, and those congressmen is like, I have a question. If insider trading is wrong and it's wrong to sell and trade stuff based off of information that the public doesn't have, how come you guys do it all the time?
The Lounge says conservatives speak all the anti-socialist rhetoric. But if I were to ask the likes of Donald Trump why socialism doesn't work, these conservatives couldn't give you a detailed explanation because they haven't read Mises.
Yeah, that's one problem with a lot of, you know, so-called anti-communist, anti-socialists, and it really hates me because I'm anti-communist, anti-socialist, is when they can't actually explain why it's bad. Like if you ask like you know, those old-fashioned, you know, conservatives, you know, like why communism is bad, they say, oh, it's because they're a bunch of godless hipsters that don't believe in God and country and all. It's like, no, that's not why communism is bad.
Right. They couldn't even explain to you what the economic calculation problem is, so I wouldn't take conservatives seriously. They're every bit as credible as that of Marxists. Well, the thing is, if you really understand why socialism and communism don't work, you understand why government doesn't work, just in general.
Yep.
I mean, I kind of get that it was difficult for Mises and Hayek to take that kind of last step forward to anarchy, but that's where Rothbard came in.
What are effective methods for reducing abortion? Oh, Robot Chicken made fun of this topic, and it was pretty funny. It's simple: teach kids proper sexual education. You know, teach them like, listen, if you must have sex, not that we're encouraging, use protection.
The most reliable way, by far, that would solve all the thing, is having the parents active in the child's life.
Yep.
If you have good parental supervision and parental involvement in a child's life, they are so much less likely to get a teen pregnancy and need an abortion.
Yep. Robot Chicken made fun of that with, like, it was a parody of Veggie Tales, but it was called Fruity Fables for obvious reasons, and it had this guy called Bob the Banana. You know, he's caught by his friend Arthur the Apple, teaching sex education to teenagers, and he says that goes against everything we believe. And then he's like, but Arthur, you don't understand. God came to me in a dream. Bob the banana, you must continue teaching sex ed. But God, Arthur said sex ed is evil. Don't listen to him. What is the most evil thing a woman can do? Get an abortion? And what causes abortions? Unwanted pregnancies? What prevents unwanted pregnancy? Oh my God, condoms prevent unwanted pregnancies.
You should have to live in the district in order to represent that district. I don't know if it applies on the district level, but I think you do have to have your primary residence in that state.
Mm.
Of course, they fudge that all the time. They rent an apartment and put it down as their primary residence.
But we need to, and another thing too, you got to remember, Chauncey, is that there's a thing called gerrymandering. If a representative wants to get power over something he doesn't have, all he has to do is rewrite the representative lines. You know, well,
Yeah.
yeah. That's one amendment that should be in the Constitution, but we know it's never going to happen because it's going to hurt Congress. Is banning gerrymandering. Though to be fair, there is
Well,
a
the thing is,
complicated
how do you define gerrymandering? Because we just went through this in North Carolina. Because you remember what our districts used to be like. I've shown these before. Those little crinkly districts that kind of snake up and down the interstates and everything. That was what the Democrats had done.
I really wish I could find it because I do know, like many, many years ago, like before 2020, when you did the podcast, back when you allowed co-hosts, one person who won the Silver Cluon Award was a guy who gathered up all these districts, and he actually made an art collage out of them because some of them actually formed interesting patterns.
Yeah, but
like one of them looked like the constellation Pisces.
But you look at it, at what it is today, and there was this dumb thing the Republicans had done late in the last decade, but it's a lot better now. The districts make a lot better sense. They're probably not as good as they could be, but they make a lot more sense. But the Democrats are screaming their heads off that it's racial gerrymandering because they lost the districts that were predominant black. They were only predominantly black because they made these little crinkly, districts up and down 85 and all those. I like that fun with the facts. The proportional system, proportional representation is a lot better. Yes, both parties do gerrymandering. Yeah, we know that.
Yeah. Chauncey says, yeah, and someone said, Chauncey said people should pay for their own abortions. Yeah, that's another thing that I think it's ignored in the pro-life, pro-choice debate is, because there have been some pro-lifers that have said, listen, if you decide to personally do it, fine. I won't be happy about it. Just don't force me to pay for it. That's another thing some people are outraged about it.
Don't force people to pay for it.
Yeah. Like fun fact, one genuine.
Stay out of it.
Like fun fact, one genuine issue I have with Planned Parenthood is the fact that it takes government money, and which I do agree. Because there are people who do not agree with what Planned Parenthood does, yet they're forced to support it through taxpayer dollars. I think Planned Parenthood as an organization should raise its own funds.
You'd be surprised how many people don't know both parties do gerrymandering. Usually, in my experience at least, those are like really partisan people who believe the Democrats can do no wrong and the Republicans are the evil, and oh, look at those evil gerrymandering. They took all these districts away from black people and all that. Which, by the way, the only reason they're saying that is because the Supreme Court said that the federal government and the federal courts have no say in partisan gerrymandering. They only have a say in racial gerrymandering because there are constitutional issues with those of representation and equal protection and things like that. So that's why they try to make everything out to be racial, because that's how they get it up to the federal level.
Yeah. By the way, I once saw a funny comedy skit one time that was making fun of the the bake decision about affirmative action and all that, where a person was trying to defend, the place not allowing Bake in, where they say, well, Bake wasn't discriminated against because he was white and they failed, the quotas. He actually was rejected because of his age, and the person's like, so it's still so he was still discriminated against then, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but you're saying he wasn't discriminated against. Which is true. Like, I think that's actually probably what kind of hurt their case was when they were in court. The university said, no, we didn't discriminate against him, based on his race. We did it because of his age. That's different, though.
I'm tired of the media propping up race hustlers. Well, that's because they are race hustlers.
Yeah.
There is a reason for this.
Yep. We're literally seeing it with that Anthony case, about that stabbing.
Which case was this?
I can't pronounce his first name, I'm sorry, but that black kid that stabbed that white kid because there was a track meet and it was raining, and he went into the other team's tent and was asleep, and even though he wasn't allowed there, and when one of the guys told him, hey man, you can't be here, go to the tents on your team, he said, you messing with me, and basically stabbed the kid to death. We need to say this, he needs to get his lawyer to tell his parents to shut the hell up. Because they're trying to make it all about, oh, our son's being a target of racism and all that. And a lot of people, and even some lawyers, are saying, you got to tell your lawyers, whoever their lawyer is, needs to tell them, shut up. Don't make it about race. Let's focus on defending your son.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've been focusing a little more on the Karen Reed trial because that second trial started, and I wasn't really following it through the first trial, but oh my God. Talk about corruption.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I mean, you hear like these things like, and the internet goes on, well, this is an innocent person who was set up by the police, and you don't know what to think. Then you start looking at this trial, and you just start looking at the witnesses, which is still the prosecution's case in chief. You're like, oh my God, they set up this woman.
Yeah, also, speaking of legal action, I don't know if I mentioned it before, but if I was Ross Ulbricht, I'd set up a legal team and consider suing that judge that sentenced him to double life plus 40 years.
Well, that would be nice if you could get that. If you could get that.
Because from what I understand, she's still active, and she's still active in law. She's now a private attorney though. But yeah.
Yeah, she's not a judge anymore.
Yeah, but still,
He makes a Power Mac G5 into a Power PC Amiga? Cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I miss the Amiga.
Yeah.
I wish today's computers had been descendants of the Amiga instead of the IBM.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm not much of a computer guy, but I've seen a lot of YouTube videos about them. One cool thing about a lot of those retro computers, now to be fair, part of it was because they were relatively primitive, but apparently they were very easy to learn how to code on. Yeah.
Well, you basically had to code to use them.
Yeah. Yep, you couldn't just, like I remember, with the Commodore 64, if you wanted to play a game on it, you couldn't just pop the game in and hit start. You had to type in load, asterisk, parenthesis, that, and this. Yeah.
Mine was the VIC-22, Chauncey.
Yep.
Oh my God, it had 3 whole kilobytes of memory.
Yeah.
God, that was
the only reason I know about the VIC-20 is because Angry Video Game Nerd did an episode on it. He was doing for a Halloween special, he was doing Dracula games, and one of them was for the VIC-20. And after he finally installed it and did all the programming, he's like, and by the way, the graphics don't exist because it's a text game. Yeah, there were a lot of those back in the day. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the VIC-20 could do graphics. That was one of its big things, and especially the 64.
Well, I mean, it could, but the particular game he was reviewing, it was an RPG text game, basically.
Yeah. The cassette tape drive. If you wanted to save, you had to press record and play.
Yep. Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah. They used to play. They used to play them on cassettes or floppy disks that were actually floppy.
Yeah, the 5 1/4s.
Yep. And that's
Oh
not
God,
even
the
and that's
5
not even
1/4-inch discs with the Apple IIs. Oh my God, a friend of mine had an Apple II. And he had it, you know, those tables where, you know, the legs fold up, and you just fold them out and set it up. He set it up on that. And we called his Apple II the washing machine emulator because every time it started going with a floppy drive, the whole table would shake back and forth like a washing machine.
Oh yeah. I mean, I'm not that old, but I remember back in the day where if you wanted, where in order to access the internet, you had to go through, you had to wait 2 minutes while your computer went.
Oh yeah, even BBSs before that, you called up a local, you dialed a local number and did your BBSing.
Yep.
And you could download a whole JPEG in just 20 minutes.
Yeah. I think I saw this one challenge and it was called, and it was about electronic noises, and it was like you might be old if you recognize this sound, this noise. And they did that, they did the dial up, and another one was the iconic, if you'd like to make a call, please hang up and try again. If you need help, hang up or call your operator.
Yeah.
Remember that?
Yep. How do we get rid of internet scams like Pi ad blocker? I'm not familiar with that one, but just get everyone to use uBlock Origin. Yep, choose a phone line or internet. If you were on the internet, you couldn't use the phone.
Yep.
Unless you got a second phone line. So there was an Amiga programmer named Steve Tibbett, and he was great. He was on it was this service called Portal where you could go in and do all your Usenet groups and everything else. So he wrote for the Amiga, what was it called? Portal X, something like that. Anyway, the idea was you would just connect and it would send all your emails and make all your posts and then download all the new Usenet posts and all your emails or anything and then cut you off. Because it wasn't just tying up the phone line back then, you were actually also charged by how long you were on. And then you could go through all of the emails and do all of the replies, everything offline. Then you would just connect again long enough to upload it and get with the new one. Yeah. That's what it was like. You didn't have these always on connections back then.
Yeah, the lounge says, what I find disheartening is the ability to look people to look around them. Chile, Hong Kong, Singapore, all examples of economies opening up their markets, and they've been vastly superior. Like, how people will do special pleading with socialism by saying, well, it wasn't real socialism. When you point to an example of free market capitalism working, they go, well, that's different. That country had, that country has really rich mining resources and infrastructure.
Well, it's like he mentions Hong Kong. The thing they always said about Hong Kong was, but Hong Kong has a port. It's like, do you have any idea what the carrying capacity is of Venezuela's ports compared to Hong Kong's lone port and how easy they had access to both the Atlantic and the Pacific?
Yeah. Like so many
Whereas
people
Hong
talk
Kong
about
has this one port just stuck out of the way that wasn't anywhere near as big. So it wasn't the port, so keep your mouth shut.
Yeah, also fun fact about Hong Kong, it once hosted one of the very, very few cases of an anarcho-capitalist society in place, the Kowloon Wall City.
Jonathan Clement. Yes, Kami-chan loves you. This is something that he's doing over on the Discord. He's kind of created his own religion. And Kami-chan is basically this anime girl. And every now and then he just posts an AI picture of him and says, Kami-chan loves you.
Yeah.
Because she does.
Is it a genuine religion or a mock religion?
It's just something he came up with.
I mean, like
but I mean, at least this version of God is cute. That's something you don't really have with other religions.
Kind of reminds me of this one film adaptation I saw of Robinson Crusoe, where Crusoe has an argument with Friday over God, and Friday points out, how do you know your God exists if you don't have a picture of it? Our God Bakia, we know what he looks like. He's a giant crocodile. What does your God look like?
He says, I sincerely practice it sincerely at any rate. What are the practices of Kami-chan? The only thing I know about it is she loves me. So. And she's
I sincerely practice it sincerely. That sounds like a British dry humor.
From the Department of Redundancy Department.
Yep. Or Franz Kafka Airport, where protocols must be filed in the proper protocol. Yeah. I've been to Franz Kafka Airport once, and my flight got delayed because the pilot was taking a nap in the office, and when he woke up, he was a giant cockroach.
Now, you see, Jonathan, if you were thinking, you would have started that sentence with, sorry, I apologize.
A lot of it is Shinto practice. I don't really know a whole lot about Shintoism.
From what I understand, if you're in Japan, you're born Shintoist and you die Buddhist.
Yep, that's how it is. Yep, that's what a lot of people jokingly say. You're born a Shintoist, you act like a Christian, and you die a Buddhist.
Yeah, that's annoying, says the lounge. Socialists are asking for the impossible while judging the existing societies against a utopian fantasy.
Yeah.
Because that's all they got.
Yeah. Well, and, going back to what I said, there actually was an actual anarcho-capitalist society in the Kwanlun Wall City, and, it wasn't perfect. It had a lot of issues, but it wasn't as bad as people thought it was. In fact, many people actually went there because they genuinely thought the goods and service provided there were actually there. Yeah, then but then when Hong Kong was handed over to China, in order to appease the Chinese tourists and all that, they were told you got to tear it down, and they tore it down.
Fighting Zen is showing other old PCs being turned into high-end Amigas. Watched the documentary on Kowloon. What's that?
The walled city. That's what I was talking about.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It was a thing is, it was technically in Hong Kong, but the reason why it was an anarcho-capitalist capitalist city was basically because it was one of those rare cases where it technically wasn't on either border. It technically wasn't on the Chinese side of Hong Kong, and it wasn't on the British side, so it was basically a stateless zone because they didn't know where it was.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like I said, it wasn't perfect and it had its flaws, particularly the fact that because it didn't have a government, many people relied on the triads, to do things like, keep the peace and regulate industry. But, it was actually a lot better compared to some of the other services.
Yeah.
It's kind of like with Somalia.
It's amazing
in a way,
how many little examples of anarchies there are. I'd like to see some, proper degreed Austrian economists do an analysis of the frost fairs, when back when the Thames would freeze over, they'd go there and they'd, set up booths and have games and do all sorts of things. And just because of the way the laws were written, basically it was an anarchy. There weren't any limits on what you could do on the Thames, because normally you're not on the Thames because the Thames is liquid. You might be on a boat, but here you're not on a boat, so the laws of shipping don't apply. Yeah. So they ended up being for, a few months out of the year, You had a little anarchy going on.
Yeah, fun. Yeah, fun fact. That's actually because so many people talk about how it's like, oh, back in the 1950s, we were so prosperous because we had taxes as high, as like 60 to 70% and all that. But the thing is that nobody paid them. In fact, the reason why many people think, some people believe the reason why cruise ships entered a resurgence in popularity, even though planes were a thing, was because businesses would book cruises, and then once they were in international waters, so it was technically kind of sort of a lawless zone, they would start doing their business meetings and then say, oh nope, we didn't do it in the United States, so therefore we don't have to pay taxes.
Yep. Well,
Yeah,
that's also why you would drive the company car and live in a company apartment and fly around in the company plane,
yeah,
because that
yeah.
way
That's
you
the thing,
didn't
people.
need to pay for those things yourself out of your salary, so they could get away with paying you a lower salary so that you didn't have to pay as much taxes.
Yep, that's the thing, people too. Why we say why we're against tax increases on the wealthy and all that. Because here's the thing: it's not because we don't want the, it's not because we want the rich to get richer and the poor to get poor. It's because we know the increasing taxes on the rich is always going to affect us. Because here's the thing: people need to remember: the rich are rich. They have the economic on the capital and resources to figure out a way out of paying their taxes, whether that means paying, hiring a lobbyist firm to make special cases for them, or like you said, they'll say, okay, I'll fly to the Cayman Islands and do my business meeting there, so therefore it's technically not a business, so therefore it's technically, a business expense.
The lounge says Javier Malay and colleagues identify as ANCAPs, but I don't think they'll actually actualize such a society. Admittedly, it's hard to just disband the government in its entirety. Yeah, but he's making a good go for it.
Yeah. Yeah, the only downside I think that's going to happen is that, because unfortunately we kind of saw this happen in Chile, is that once he leaves, another party's going to bring everything back, and they're going to say, oh, look at it, everything's going to be okay again.
See, I mean, if nothing else, you start taxing them, you start taxing the life out of them, then what you do is you make all of their positions volunteer positions. And then since they have a zero income, you'll say, hey, we'll have a special program to house our zero income volunteers and our low income volunteers, and we'll put them up in housing and, let them use cars and things like that. And then, hey, they don't have anything. Actually, I think I just described the Catholic Church.
Mm.
That wasn't even where I was going for that. I just kind of realized it as soon as I finished.
Yep. Speaking of the Catholic
But yeah,
Church, the Pope
these
died.
cardinals and everyone, oh, they live in poverty. They don't own anything. They just live in this big lavish church, that's
Yeah.
owned by the church. They don't own it. They're living in poverty. Yeah, most people would love to live in that kind of poverty.
Oh yeah. Sounds like a nonprofit. Yep. Oh yeah. I know I bring it up all the time, but I'll say it again. Scrooge had every right to be skeptical, of not donating to charity, because the sad reality is, like, a good number of charities either are outright scams, or, now to be fair, they have good intentions, but they don't work. Like, like those charities that donated all that clothing to Africa. It's like, yay, we gave all these children clothes, and we just put their dad, who's a tailor, out of business.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, no joke, that actually happened. Like, there were people within Africa lobbying the government to say, you got to stop the Americans and the British people and all that from sending us stuff, because it's literally destroying our economy. I mean, that's kind of
Yeah,
like what
same
happened in
thing. Same
Somalia.
thing with food aid. All it's doing is displacing local farmers.
I mean, if I recall correctly, that's kind of what happened in Somalia. It wasn't ideal, but things were improving. Then the UN came in, started giving away all this free aid and all that, and soon all the farmers, fishermen, and tailors and all that, they were out of jobs because people were going to the UN. And then of course, the warlords came along, they would send their own people. They would send their own people to these places, and they say, get as much food and resources as you could. They would bring it back to the warlords. The warlords would sell it to other countries, at an inflated price. Then they use that money to buy weapons, and now you have a civil war.
Yeah, and that was the problem. A lot of times they just get stolen by the governments or by a warlord and then sold on the black market.
Yep. Yeah, I was watching this one documentary about a private military corporation called Executive Outcomes. I don't know if you've heard of it, but they were hired, throughout the 80s and early 90s. They were being hired by many African governments, to stop, civil wars and all that. And one funny thing is that one time they stopped the civil war in Sierra Leone, and they pretty much more or less wiped out a terrorist organization that was causing issues there. And then what ended up happening is that the United Nations threw a fit and said, "Oh no, you can't do that. That's in violation. Sierra Leone, you have to fire Executive Outcomes and let us deal with the terrorists." So finally, Sierra Leone gave in and said, "Sorry, ex-ops, we're firing you." And what happened in less than a year? The terrorist organization came back, and in greater numbers, and they ended up winning.
Well, that's what happened in Afghanistan. 20 years of war to get rid of the Taliban. They leave, what happens? Yep. Taliban goes right back into power.
Yep. Yeah, they basically did what the North Vietnamese did. Like, so many people, I saw this one funny meme. It was like, how people think the Vietnam War ended, and it showed, the North Vietnamese going, hi, you want to keep going to America, and America going, I can't, I'm too tired. When how it really happened was, now you promise that you're going to honor the Paris Treaty, and you're not going to invade South Vietnam once we leave, right? And North Vietnam goes, oh yeah, absolutely, we are not going to invade South Vietnam and respect their sovereignty. And he's crossing his fingers behind his back.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's basically what happened. It ended with a peace deal. The North Vietnam and the United States signed a treaty and all that, and they promised they would respect South Vietnam. Then a year, once all the U.S. troops were left, they said, "Quick, he's not looking. Charge! Go to Saigon."
The food that was found rotting in Puerto Rico after the hurricane. Yeah, getting the food there and giving them the food is one thing. Distributing the food is something else.
Mm.
And effectively, you are talking about central planning. So good luck with that.
I once saw one cringy YouTuber who was a sailor, and he tried to say that the Jones Act was not the reason why Puerto Rico didn't get aid in time. Yeah, you're familiar with the Jones Act, right?
Aid is a scam. I only hope that, like, after the events of the last year or two, people are realizing that, yeah, FEMA's just a scam.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, people in the mountains of North Carolina know it now.
Yep. I mean, come on. I mean, a really good example about how we don't necessarily need government services. I mean, hell, Seinfeld did an episode about it back in the '90s, where Kramer, is trying to file, like this thing so he can get a tax exemption from the government, so he doesn't have to pay taxes that go to him, that go to the postal service. And then Newman goes, "But you need the postal service, right? How are you going to send your mail?" Well, computers are out now. I can use an email, and if I need to mail something physical, I'll just use something like FedEx or UPS. And Newman's like, okay, it is true. Nobody needs the post office anymore, but don't let them know that. I'll be out of a job.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know Lysander Spooner tried to set up his own mailing service that was pretty successful, but then the government ordered him to shut it down.
Yeah, the American Letter Mail Company.
Yeah.
That was when they said, nope, the Postal Service is a monopoly and only government can do that.
Yep.
So apparently the Constitution giving the federal government the power to do something, run a post office, means they also have the power to stop everyone else from doing it.
Yeah, that's a complete misinterpret. That's another thing too that a lot of politicians like to do when they say, well, it's constitutional, is that is that the Constitution says you may do something or you can do something, but they interpret it as that you absolutely must do it, when that's not what it's mean. It just means the government can do it, like, if a practical thing isn't there. Like, for instance, if there's a rural community that doesn't have a reliable postal network, then yeah, then the government can deliver mail there. But most people aren't like that, you know?
Yeah, universities are like that here, Lounge.
Mm.
Private universities aren't so bad, but I think in England, isn't it true that the University of Birmingham is the only private university in the country?
Yeah.
Communist Manifesto, greatest book ever written. Jeez. Well, you know, the one good thing of that is that might encourage more people to read it. And kind of like with the Bible, the more people read the Bible, the more atheists you get. The more you read the Communist, more people read the Communist Manifesto.
You know, it's another good example of that too is Mein Kampf. I haven't read Mein Kampf, but I watched TIK History, and he has read Mein Kampf, and he has said that it is a terrible book to read. And no, not because of the Nazism thing. It's literally because Hitler is a terrible writer. He rambles. He repeats the same thing over and over. He's redundant.
Well, you see, I don't know. I never know how much stuff like that is him or the translation, because I don't read German.
Yeah, true. You know what's one author I don't understand how he got so popular? Stephen King.
Oh, God, don't we? Well, people like the movies because there have been some good movie versions, but...
Yeah, and people like, oh, you're just saying that because you don't like his political views and you can't separate the art from the artist. No, I've read some of his short stories in Pet Sematary. They didn't scare me, they bored me.
And I thought that long before I knew what his political views were.
Yeah.
Because I mean, really, if you look at all of the things that make The Shining so great, all of those were decisions made by Stanley Kubrick, not Stephen King.
Yeah. And I know Stephen... Yeah, and it's...
The Communist Manifesto is one of Marx's worst writings. Well, and the thing is, it's amazing how they'll tell you just read Marx, and then you push them on it, and it turns out they haven't read Marx. They haven't read the Communist Manifesto.
Yep.
They don't have a clue what it says.
Yep. Or another case too I've actually heard is that they'll quote something and say, that's something that Marx said, then you look it up, it's like, no, that's what Friedrich Engels said.
I mean, it might have been because it was written by both of them, but still.
Yeah. That's actually one thing
you can't just say, oh, the parts that you don't like were Engels. They read it together. They both agreed with everything in it. It was a manifesto.
Oh, yeah.
That was what they agreed. That's the point of it.
Oh yeah, I saw this one funny joke one time, and it was talking about what would you do with a time machine, and one person said, I'd go back in time and I'd kill Karl Marx, and one person said, actually, you don't have to kill Karl Marx to stop communism from becoming a thing. All you gotta do is make sure that Karl Marx never meets Friedrich Engels.
Yeah.
Yeah, because...
Don't kill Marx, kill Engels.
Well, you don't have to kill Engels, you just gotta make sure they never meet, because if you actually read, you know, the history of the writing of the Communist Manifesto... If Marx had never met Engels, the Communist Manifesto never would have been written, because Marx was lazy and an alcoholic, and Engels was, he was a workaholic and he was working on so many stuff.
Yeah. How did Jack escape the locked cooler in The Shining? I don't remember the movie well enough. It's been a while.
Well, you know, it's funny because, you know, the whole point is that the ghost was supposed to let him out, but I've actually heard one person say there's actually a rational explanation for how he got out, and that's most freezers, they actually have an emergency lever that you can push that lets you out, so even if the freezer is locked, you can push it out and get out of there. Yeah,
it's a movie trope that you can't unlock a freezer from the inside.
Yep.
That's just dumb. That's a safety thing anyone would have thought of.
Oh there's so many movie tropes and all that. Like, or another good example is Five Nights at Freddy's. It's like, oh yeah, so yeah, we've got some animatronics that may or may not be haunted, but they sometimes go in there, and if they see a person who is an animatronic, they kill them. Oh yeah, and the only mechanism to prevent them from blocking you, yeah, you see, we're on a power shortage, so we're gonna limit how much of it you can use. And a lot of people are pointing out that is an OSHA violation and a lawsuit waiting to happen.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
There's just a lot of weird tropes like that that aren't
Yeah.
even close to how things work.
Yeah, I'm not
It's
gonna lie.
movie logic.
That's why I can't sometimes take the greedy. I can't take the greedy corporation trope that puts profit over people seriously. Because sometimes it's just so stupid. Because it's like even a greedy businessman who's trying to cut corners can recognize. Yeah, we probably shouldn't do that because if we do that, something's gonna happen, and then we're gonna get sued.
Well, and the thing is, it either goes one of two ways. You start off with, the corporation is evil and that's that. Or when they show how the corporation can do it or get away with it or whatever, there's always the government involved somehow. Like they're
Oh
a
yeah.
military contractor or they know a
Oh yeah.
senator or whatever.
Yeah, or it's like one of those things where it's like it's a corporation that rules the world, and they make all these military products and all that. Well, who are they selling them to? Well, they're selling them to governments. But you just said they own all the world's governments.
Yeah.
I'm looking at you, Wally. Like, yeah, we own all the world's governments. Okay, how does that work? We bought them.
Well, the idea of Wally though is that's just kind of the ultimate in Mussolini fascism, where you have everything that ends up being run by a single company / government. And that's how the world is because, everything is the corporation, the by and large. But if you look, Fred Willard's character is basically the president standing behind a presidential podium, making decisions for everyone,
Mm.
So that actually makes a lot more sense than people think.
Mm. Yeah, that's another trope I see in science fiction that also doesn't make any sense. Is that trope of in this society there's only two types of people. There's the super duper wealthy that live in these palaces and lavish lifestyle, and the rest of people who are so dirt poor they live in shells, and shells eat out of the garbage and can't even afford to bathe. To which I say, well, then how the hell are the rich making money?
Yeah.
Yeah. If the people are so poor and broke that they can't even afford to bathe, where the heck are they getting their money from? Are they just handing the money over to each other in an infinite circle?
That was the problem I had with the Doctor Who episode Oxygen, which is otherwise an excellent episode. I'd give it like a 9 out of 10, and I would have given it 10 out of 10 if it weren't for this. They were trying to make it show like this is capitalism taken to the extreme. It's actually not. It's corporatism taken to the extreme. Because there is no profit whatsoever in saying, okay, you've no longer paid for your oxygen. We're just going to pump it out into space. Well, how do you make money just wasting oxygen and pumping it out into space? But if it's a way of controlling people, that makes a lot more sense.
Oh yeah. And of course, people say,
So I mean, a
but
5-minute rewind would have totally done that.
and of
But
course,
then
there's
they
gonna
would
be
have had
people
to
that are
understand a little economics, and they're British. You can't expect much.
And of course, some people are going to say, but farmers do it all the time. They make money if they let certain crops rot. Well, yeah, because the government's telling them, oh, you're overproducing, you got to cut it down.
Yeah.
Yeah. Here's my own little joke about when the people say, well, it's trying to show capitalism taken to the extreme. People, here's what capitalism taken to the extreme is. It's a person going to the store and buying something, and they don't have to pay a sales tax.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not the purge. It's not anything like that. It's just people going about their business. It will be super boring It would be the most boring movie ever made.
Yeah, that's the thing I hate about The Purge is that it falls into that whole trope. It's like, oh yeah, humans are evil, greedy, and ruthless, and the only thing that's keeping us in play are rules. It's like, really? And here's the thing.
David
If
Brown
that were,
says,
and
"Hi Shane, I love your YouTube channel. Keep up the good work. Thank you so much. That's always great to hear." And just as a
and here's the
reminder, if
thing.
you like doing what I do, the URLs are on the screen, donate.begonsity.tv, or you could go ahead and send a super chat, streamlabs.com/Shane Killian. No one's made me dance in a while. The little low poly me doing a dance. Will pop up with your super chat.
It's delayed, but. And going back to what I was saying, as the old saying goes, here's another thing too. Let's give you the benefit of the doubt. Let's say yes, humans are inherently evil, cruel, selfish, and mean, and will throw each other under the bus and rape and pillage each other. If that's the case, then you don't want a government because who's gonna be in charge of the government?
Yeah, and who's going to make all these rules?
Yeah.
Milton Friedman always said that. Where are you going to find all the saints and angels to be in your government?
Yeah. That's also why I can't take Lord of the Flies seriously anymore, because we read it and we're taught about how it's a good visual IQ on the history of humanity. Then you look up actual cases where people have been stranded on islands and there's been no lawlessness, and guess what? They actually handled it pretty well and they actually acted very civilized.
There were a couple of places where they actually kind of, had a good community going, and then some other, whoever the imperial people were at the time, Spain or England or whoever, would just come in with a military and put an end to it all.
Yeah. I mean, I forgot which experiment it was, but it was that one guy that was trying to do a study about how to dissolve human conflict. And you said a thing that often gets ignored about it, that so many people talk about it, it's not the fact of how he got it done. Rather, it's that the trouble he had was that he couldn't get the kids to start fighting, no matter how hard he tried.
Oh yeah, you're talking about the
the
robbers cave experiment.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like, okay, we're going to set them up in teams, we're going to make them divide and divisible, and then we're going to secretly sabotage and make it look like that, and they wouldn't stop fighting. Like, for instance, it says, okay, we're going to steal the flag and tell them the other team did, and they told them that, and it's like, well, let's go to the other team. They tell the other team, and the other team's like, what? Okay, whoever did that, they need to come forward, because that's not okay. And then it's like, why aren't the kids fighting?
And what they don't often tell people is that was the third try. The first two tries, they couldn't get it to happen at all and had to give up.
Yeah. And basically, the way they finally got the kids to start fighting was basically, they did what, we've kind of known for centuries. It's all you got to do is tell them there's a resource. It's very limited. Okay, can we have it? No, you can't have it because the other side took it. Yeah.
Well, and even then, it took a bunch of tries.
Yeah. Yeah, that's another thing, too, that, many people fail to realize is that, the guy wasn't trying to start kids fighting, for the sake of it. He was trying to figure out how can we, peacefully resolve conflict without war and all that. And the issue he had was that he couldn't get the kids fighting.
Yeah, the idea was when you have a conflict, because this was in the years after World War II, when you get a group like the Nazis and they've, raised this not a whole generation, but they were raising kids to hate Jews and hate everyone else. How do you get them not to do that? And the problem was he couldn't get them divided in the first place.
Yeah. And if I recall correctly, when he finally did get them to fighting, the best way he got them to do it was basically kind of a form of capitalism, get them to cooperate and exchange and work with each other.
Yeah. And it wasn't that hard. Yeah. They only had 1 week of camp left when he finally got them against each other, and it only took a few days to resolve everything.
Yeah. We always talk about experiments and the dangers of social pressure, and I actually found one interesting experiment that's actually much more reliable than the electric shock experiment that actually has been kind of proven to be false. It's actually a more reliable one, and that's the false answer, where how it is, right? They have certain lines, and you have to write down what's the length of the line, and the answer is pretty obvious, but everyone who's a stage actor gives the wrong answer, and people, even though they know it's the right answer, they answer wrong.
Yeah, to go along with it.
Yeah.
But they all seem to blame everything on immigration. Yeah, well, the thing is, if you want to convince people that they need to keep you in power and pay all their taxes money, their all their money to you in taxes, well, you got to have a scapegoat. You got to have a reason for it, because otherwise they'll say, "Wait a minute, why are we paying taxes to you?" So you got to say, "Okay, the reason why your life isn't great is because of immigrants, Jews or whoever, the rich. The rich are taking all your money. It's Elon Musk's fault."
Yep, it's the same principle. It's the same principle behind the whole yeah, don't talk about your salary to other workers. You've always been told you should do that because it's rude and you'll come off as bragging, when the actual reason is because it makes it difficult for pay negotiations. And one of the rare
Yep.
episodes of Adam Ruins Everything that's actually pretty good. I like that one skit he did where it's like, because here's what people think we'll have. Oh, I make $80,000 a year. You jerk! You don't need to rub it in. What will really happen? I make $80,000 a year. What? I do a similar job to you, and I'm only making 65. What's going on? Yeah, that's what they want. It's so you don't have information, so you don't know how to negotiate pay raise. So when your pay raise is up, they say, yeah, we can only bump your pay up to an extra $3,000 a year. If you have the information, you can point out, well, how come that one secretary who does less work and not as important work, she's making much more money than I am, and she seems to be really friendly with the boss, because then you got him there.
I have a little higher opinion of Adam Ruins Everything. Basically, in an average episode, 2/3 of the episode was good, because you had the 3 segments and then a little coda at the end to kind of bring it all home. Yes, there were some episodes that were bad all the way through, but usually it was just one segment that was bad and the other 2 were pretty good.
Like, to be fair, one actually thing that he did that was kind of good, although he came to the wrong conclusion, because ultimately his argument came from, oh, the wrong people were in power, was actually when he did a video about why did the Democrats fail the 2024 election, even though a lot of people hate Donald Trump. And he brought up, because the sad reality is that the Democrats, were out of touch. They were so obsessed with trying to defeat Trump that they forgot, that, oh yeah, you need to be elected into power, and in order to get elected, the people need to see a reason to put you in power, and they weren't seeing that.
Well, and also the people didn't really choose either of their candidates. Joe Biden had been kind of forced on them, and now, going up for re-election, everyone was seeing what was going on with Biden's mental state. But they're like, no, we have to keep the unity. We can't have an actual primary. We got to keep Biden in. And then Biden's not there. Okay, what do? Do we nominate someone else? No, Kamala. It's got to be Kamala. Make it Kamala.
Yeah, exactly.
And the party had never actually chosen their candidate.
Oh yeah. There was a lot of that going on. And in all honesty, I'm pretty sure a lot of people voted for Trump in 2024, not because they genuinely liked Trump or wanted him, basically because they felt, you know what, screw it, we're screwed no matter what happens. So
Well, I mean, people saw what a pig's ear the Democrats had made of the economy.
And then tried to gaslight and say, no, it wasn't bad.
No, the economy is good. This was the greatest economy in American history. You see, that's something else that loses it for you.
Yeah.
Because especially when they go, no, you people are too stupid to know. You need to listen to your betters, because we've got statistics and everything. And we've got people with letters beside their name who have studied it. And they say you're really good. You're really well off. So you don't know. You don't understand your own life. We understand your life better than you do. Yeah, that's not going to work.
Yeah. I mean, I forgot who it was, but there was this one economist who appeared on John Stossel one time, and he said, here's the thing, when the government says things are improving or things are getting better or we're actually cutting down on spending, here's what it usually means. It goes something more like this. So you see, we were predicting that inflation was gonna rise by 10%, but it only rose by 5%.
Yeah.
But you see the fallacy though. It's like it's still rising. I mean, okay, yeah, it's not rising as high as we thought it would be, whoopity doo, but we don't want to see inflation at all, you know.
But then you have the, like, first of all, the stock market matters again, apparently.
Yeah.
But then there's a dip in the stock market, which, if you look historically, it's a blip, and it's like, this is the worst downturn since the Great Depression or whatever.
Yeah. By the way, so many people like to use the stock market as proof of a natural capitalistic monopoly. But here's the thing that people fail to realize when you really think about it: the stock market isn't a company or anything. It's just a gathering place, you know.
Well, no, there is a company underneath it, and a lot of people don't realize that. For the most part, except for the off hours trading, you really don't trade stocks with each other. You're trading them, with the company behind it that has a pool of all of these stocks, and they're just setting the price based on it. It's an exchange, just
Yeah.
like a money exchange.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Yeah. What is a stock though? Yeah. That's a question I've seen people answer, and I'll be honest, I don't 100% know all the answer to. Like, I know a stock is basically like you own some kind of equity within the company, but
Well, I mean, it depends. Usually, it's not just equity in the company; it also gives you voting rights.
yeah,
But then some stock isn't voting stock. So,
yeah,
like, when people were making a big deal about that Elon Musk thing, is about, oh, we would give him, first of all, it would only give him like 25% stock or something like that. And second of all, not all of that was voting stock.
my biggest fear that I have that my biggest thing that makes me facepalm, and it's clearly showing up Elon derangement syndrome. That's a thing now. Is people say, he has access, to all the U.S. government money and all that. What's going to stop him from transferring all that money to his account? Because it's obvious. It's obvious and open to the public. You see, the reason why the government can get away with stealing money from you is because they do it all shady, and they have all these ways of saying, well, technically it wasn't insider trading. I was actually doing this and this and that. Elon just outright transferring all the money in the U.S. Treasury to his own personal account. There's nothing he could say or do to defend that. Everyone knows what he's doing, and they can easily track him down and hold him accountable for that. That's the reason why governments like to be so bureaucratic. It's because that's how they get away with thievery, is so you can't actually pinpoint, what they're doing wrong. And if you can, they have a rules lawyer.
And see, this is the kind of thing I'm talking about. I'm looking at the graph now from Fred when you're looking at the Dow Jones Industrial Average. The period from like November of 21 to
Mhm.
April of 22, and now you've got, the peak in November down to where it is now. The one in 22, I mean, you can tell it just by looking at the graph. It's a lot bigger than the current one. And yet, at the time, no one was saying this is the biggest, stock market downturn since the Great Depression. The worst week in April since the Great, however that went. And notice how many people just instantly came forward with that exact talking point. And you just keep seeing this over and over and over again. If you kind of train yourself to know this, and if you've got a good spread in the algorithm setup where you're getting posts from all sorts of different directions, you can see it. It's like in a matter of hours, all of a sudden, all of these same people are popping up, with the same talking point, and it's always, Ron Filipkowski and Tristan Snell, and all just the same people over and over again, and then everyone spreads it out. It's like, yeah, tell me there's not a propaganda machine in the background feeding these lines to them.
Mm.
And if you're asking if the right does it too, I'm not saying they don't, but if they do, they're smarter about it.
Mm. You know what that kind of reminds me of too about the conspiracy is, the conspiracy of big tobacco and how big tobacco, is secretly spending all this money on lobbying and they're trying to get us to start smoking. And I'm just thinking, if they're doing that, they sure are failing big time.
That's how I think about when people say guns exist only for one purpose, to kill people. Well, then they suck at it because this country has more guns than people and we're not all dead.
Oh, yeah. And no joke, I've met people that, when I bring up, the murder rates and all that, I flat out have met people that have said, yeah, but those are knives, not guns. Guns are different for reasons. I think it's because there's this misconception, and this is another thing that we have movies and video games to blame for, is that people say, because guns can kill you with just one or two shots, but with knives, you got to stab the person multiple times. It's like, no, if you talk to any EMT, a stab wound is just as dangerous as a gun wound. In fact, a stab wound and a gunshot are pretty much the same thing.
And the Klingon proverb, 1,000 throats may be slit in one night by a running man.
Yep.
Which I think he might have gotten from like the ancient Romans or something. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you actually here's a perfectly good example about how you show that guns, kind of suck at the job of killing people. If you actually look at battle statistics from medieval combat, like people fail to realize they had casualties even for small conflicts in the hundreds of thousands sometimes,
Well, and the gun control and the immigration and the war on drugs all have the same problem. They're all prohibition of one kind or another, and prohibition doesn't work.
Done with facts. What are effective ways of reducing divorce? Simple. Get the government out of it, other than just saying, okay, you're no longer married. Because the biggest issue with divorce it's not even just no-fault divorce. It's literally because if you get divorced with many states, there's often arbitrary. Like, if you and your wife get divorced, in many states, it's arbitrary. You have to give her half of your belongings. You have to pay her alimony, and you have to pay her child support, even if the child isn't biologically yours. The best way to reducing divorce and making it all messy is get the government out of it, other than just saying, oh, you're no longer married? Okay, we'll write that, you're no longer married. Everything else, that's on you. Figure it out yourself. Can you hear me, Shane?
Imagine if you could make a controller that had the same kick as a firearm.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I mean, you've always had games where you have like the special controller that you hold up to your you hold up to your shoulder like a rifle, but you're just clicking a button.
Yep.
And nowadays maybe it vibrates. Oh, plenty more from Fighting Zen. I'll mostly just let people pause and read if they want to. Mutual aid societies are greater than welfare programs. Yep. Stan Lee was a better writer than Stephen King. Chris Claremont, Jim Shooter.
I'm not gonna lie. I really, really wonder why Stephen King became even popular. Like, have you ever had that? Like, you've met someone and you take a look at all their stuff and you're just like, what the fuck do people see in this person or this artwork?
I think it's just because they started making good movies based off them.
Yeah.
Shining is a good movie. Christine is a good movie. All these are good movies. The books are terrible.
Mm. If you think his writing is bad, wait till you see his acting.
Oh, God.
Yeah. Yeah, and some people are like, well, he's not a professionally trained actor, and plus, he's clearly trying, he's clearly obviously going for the deliberately terrible, but well, first of all, he's still bad at it because he's just terrible, terrible, and second of all, according to people that have worked on the films where he's made cameo appearances, no, that's literally what he goes for. He goes for he thinks that acting is you have to be over the top and all that when you don't.
The best path to a free society, agorism, or dismantling government from within. My approach is just to get rid of the monopolization, just like we were saying with the post office. Get rid of that. Don't get rid of the post office. Just let people make competing post offices. Don't get rid of the Fed. Just let people come up with competing banking systems and currencies. Don't get rid of the police. Just let people make competing police forces and competing fire departments.
Yep.
Let people make alternatives. Because if government is so wonderful, why do they have to mandate that no one is allowed to compete with them?
Oh, yeah.
Why is your local fire department the only one who can put out a fire if your house is on fire? What if you had 2 or 3 that you or your insurance company could pick between? And then they would compete for each other based both on how much they charge and how effective they are.
Hey, Shane, I know we were talking about books and all that. Like, when you were in school, were there any other books that that your teachers were telling you that you were going to read that you were so excited to read about, and they told you the history, and you're like, oh wait, great, I can't wait to read this book, and then you read it, and you're like, wow, this is the worst thing I ever read. Why are we being taught this?
Oh, I know there were. I just can't think of any off the top of my head.
For me, it was The Great Gatsby.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah, we taught all. Now, don't get me wrong. The teacher I had for American literature, I liked him. He was an awesome guy, and I liked, all the history about that. Then we actually read the book, and I could not stay awake. I kept falling asleep every time I tried reading it. And no joke, because at the end of the day, I failed the test because it's like, so what was the message and the importance of The Great Gatsby? And I'm like, huh? It had a message.
It's BS that one agency can approve medication. Yes, when a bunch of them can protect you from your electronics. Now think about this. How often do you take medication? Yes, some of us need to take medication every day. Most people only take medication occasionally. But you've got electrical appliances going on around you all the time. Your refrigerator, your microwave, your computer. All of those protected by UL or MetLabs or whoever it is. If those go wrong, they're a much bigger threat to you than medicine is. But they're not a problem because they're not monopolies. So why should medication be a monopoly? Oh, yeah. Instead of just doing taxes, you would just pay service fees. Which is kind of how you do some of it now, like at least in my area, the fee for the fire department is a separate line item on your taxes. I mean, you still got to pay it all, but at least you know how much you're paying for the fire department.
Another good example too about airline competition making things good. Airlines used to be pretty darn good and reasonably safe and all that. Then in like the 70s, 80s, and 90s, the government started getting involved, and then that's when we start getting all the BS.
Yep. And when you have problems, instead of the airline industry trying to figure out what the problems are, why consumers don't like them, and solve it, they go whining to the government to get bailed out.
Yep.
Oh, but air travel is so important to Americans, so we can't have the industry go under. You got to bail us out.
Yeah, and people say, well, without the FAA, what'll stop, what'll prevent planes from crashing into each other? Funny thing is that I was watching a series called Mayday, which is about air disasters, and there was an air disaster where an Aeromexico airplane crashed and a private plane crashed into each other because they couldn't see each other and they didn't have certain radar. And people say, well, if the planes couldn't detect each other, why didn't the tower warn each other? And it was later discovered because the FAA tower that was monitoring them, it was using really obsolete equipment that had been readily available in other places.
Yeah, phones and computers and all the less regulated something is, the more advances you have. It gets so cheap and uses less energy. They get much more efficient, cheaper to buy, cheaper to use, and more powerful. Whereas getting with government involved in something like with healthcare.
Yeah. I once made this joke to someone one time, where if I was the mayor of the city and all that, and people came up to me and they said, "Mr. Mayor, we need to fix this city that much." Well, what do you mean? Well, we need to set up this community. We need to build more houses, and they spout on all these ideas of what they had to improve the city. You know what my response would be? I'd say, "Well, then what the hell do you need me for?"
Yeah.
You've got the idea, go out and do it. Yeah, what the hell do you need me for?
Just do it.
Yeah. I will say that's what I don't know if I brought this up before, but that's one joke that South Park missed on the opportunity when they were making fun of, how difficult it is with the cable companies and how the cable companies get off, to making you miserable. One thing that they totally missed is they had an opportunity to say, "Oh, you don't like our service and you can't afford things like Dish Network? Well, why don't you set up your own telecommunications network?" "Oh yeah, that's right. You can't. You have to be zoned and get permission for that." Which is true, so many people say it's like, the cable companies are monopolies created by capitalism. Okay, try setting up your own soft stream service and see what happens.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, contrary to what some people believe, the FCC aren't necessarily responsible for the reason why your TV gets censored. What their primary job is to basically enforce, telecommunications laws. Yep, if you're caught trying to make something without a proper license, they come and they shut you down.
Yep. Yeah, and because they're our airwaves, and since they're our airwaves, government has to divvy them up and give them to these favored networks.
Yeah. Well, that's why we need net neutrality. Net neutrality would make it worse, people. Because that's another thing that people fail to realize. Many people fail to realize net neutrality isn't stopping the government from giving broadband. What it's doing is basically saying, yeah, all those companies that are responsible for setting up, broadband that actually, they don't actually provide the internet service. Rather, they set up the cables and the and the cyber networks that allows the internet to travel. What they're basically doing is they're saying, let's have those organizations be taken over by the government. Oh yeah, because the government's totally not going to pick winners and losers.
What do you think of Bitcoin? Well, it's really heartbreaking because before the whole block debate, Bitcoin was doing really well. And then you had that, for reasons I still cannot fathom, you had that one group that just didn't want blocks to get bigger than 1 megabyte. And they were able to forcefully censor and kick out all the opposing voices. And now look at it. Plenty of better cryptos you can use.
And speaking of money, you know how some people like to criticize company towns, because they paid their workers with script, and they say, well, script couldn't be exchanged for dollars, and it essentially kept you stuck on the company property. When you really think about
That's
it,
not true.
how's that different from a state fiat currency?
Well, it's not even true. You could change script for the purpose of script, though, was so you could get in advance.
Yeah.
You
But,
could
that's
get
another
some
thing.
of it now in script, or you could wait to get your normal paycheck in dollars.
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
people are just
And of
lying
course-
about it.
And people also say, like, and even if you did exchange for dollars, it would often be nowhere near as worth, it would be in real dollars. And again, I just go out to, well, how's that any different from the U.S. dollar? If I go to Canada and I try to pay with my U.S. dollars, they're gonna tell me, no, that's no good here. We need Canadian dollars. And if I go to an airport to get it exchanged, my money's not going to be as valuable as it would be there. So really, everything people say about script, you can already say about U.S. currency, but it's okay because it's the state for some reason.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I need huge bandwidth to check my email. All you did, just go back to the net neutrality days at the time when it was going away and look at all of the claims people made about what the internet companies would start doing if we got rid of net neutrality. We got rid of net neutrality. How many of those predictions came true? None of them. You don't have to pay separately for the privilege of using Facebook or whatever. And internet access is faster and cheaper than it was. Because back then I was paying $60 a month for 100 megabits, and now I'm paying $40 a month for a gigabit. Yeah, net neutrality companies will slow down websites, yeah. That was only happening with Netflix because it got so popular so quickly that just Netflix was responsible for something like 30% of internet bandwidth, and it kept clogging up the drains. And it took a while for everyone to get up the bandwidth. And now, of course, as streaming is more common, we've got the bandwidth to handle it on the backbones.
Yeah, without net neutrality, companies would slow down websites. Why?
Yeah, what would be the profit motive?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I swear some people on the left think that businesses are run by the underpants gnomes from South Park. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Step 1, implement this terrible policy. Step 3, profit. Okay, what's step 2?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Or that old comic in the New Yorker. I think you need to be more explicit here in step 2. Where you have all that math and in the middle it says, and then a miracle occurs.
Yeah.
How do we stop streaming from becoming cable? Well, this is another consequence of IP.
Yeah, that's another thing.
Because
Too,
instead of actually having capitalism where you could negotiate with whoever to stream your show, it's got to be the part of these big media conglomerates who are just going to do a terrible job at setting up their own streaming service that's really expensive and doesn't work as well.
That's another thing. That's another thing about IP and all that. It basically is the laws that says that you can own electronic particles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, yeah. So for briefly there, we saw what it would be like, which was when all you really needed for your streaming was Netflix, Hulu, and Amazon Prime. Now, all of these, Disney has their own, and CBS has their own, Paramount has their own. I think that's the same one, actually. But, all these of them have their own. And on top of that, Netflix and Amazon Prime are both MPA members, and Hulu is owned by Disney. So the MPA captured the market. And why? Because they're this big media cartel that owns all this IP, and that's what it's for. Intellectual property was never about the artist or the author or the filmmaker or anyone. It was about the publishers from the start. When they, even with going back to the Statute of Anne, that was not about protecting the writers. The writers liked things the way it was. They liked the fact that this printing press thing meant that they could publish their own books. It wasn't about the writers. It was about the publishers. That's what it was about then, and that's what it's about now.
Yeah, the film industry. They're a bunch of. I was also watching about the history of the MPAA and all that, and I just really want to know why the hell the film industry was so willing to bend over and kiss the government's boot, and they didn't fight back like the music industry did. Because it is true. Congress tried to pull the same crap they did on the film industry back in the 1930s, but the music industry did something that the film industry didn't do, and what they should have done, they fought back.
Well, the music industry eventually caved.
Yeah.
Music industry's become the worst of the lot. The RIAA is far worse than any of them.
Yeah.
But how can anyone look at the music industry today and say, hey, look, this means that IP is great for artists?
Yeah. Speaking of IP and artists, I remember, Lars Ulrich of Metallica. I remember, post after the whole Napster thing. I remember he was trying to. I saw this funny compilation. It was a really old video, but it was showing him saying, "Well, here's the thing about Napster. It wasn't about the money. It was actually about artist control." And then the person linked to video showing Lars Ulrich complaining, "I hate Napster because it's harming my income."
Yep.
Yeah.
You pay for all these streaming sites and everything. If you knew how little of that actually made it to the artist, you'd probably rebel.
And I think Lord T Hawkeye pointed this out to me, and other people have pointed out to me, is like most people who download a lot of the music and all that for free, typically they're customers that weren't buying it anyway, either because they were too poor and couldn't afford it, or it was a classic case of, I don't really like this particular band, but everyone keeps telling me this one particular song is really good, so I'll check it out,
And then they get a new fan who goes to their concerts.
Yeah,
That's the thing. Even the industry's own studies show that piracy does not cost the money. It's either a wash or it's a net benefit.
Yeah. There's plenty of entrepreneurs, that have come out and they've actually said that live streaming and downloading and pirating is actually what made them famous. That's actually, I think Matt Stone and Trey Parker actually said that it was actually pirating and copying that actually made South Park popular.
And when you're talking about the music industry and these big record labels, remember you're talking about a group who, like in 2005, Sony, on all their CDs, put a thing in where if you put your audio CD in your computer to listen to, it put a rootkit on your computer. The worst type of malware you can possibly get. And they'd put it on your computer just for inserting the CD.
Yep. Oh yeah, I've actually heard, that, IP is the reason why PC gaming has a reputation of being glitchy, and because a lot of times, glitches in video games are actually caused because the code that they put in there to enforce copyright protection is in conflict with the computer.
We got a few more from Finding Zen, and the last one is, considering how bad Louisiana's roads are, my state would be better off letting private individuals fix every single meter all over. The problem is, what happens when you actually try that? Remember when Domino's fixed all those potholes? And remember how governments reacted to that?
I mean, it kind of goes back to what I said earlier about executive operations, the PMC. They were actually bringing peace to some African countries, and things were actually getting better, improving on the ground. And did the United Nations applaud them and give them a peace medal? No, they said, "Oh, you guys are war profiteers." Same thing happened in New York when that one guy shot that robber and stopped the robbery in progress. Was he given the civilian award? Was he rewarded and told, wow, you made our community much safer? No, the police arrested him for recklessness, but I think the real reason was that's for making us look bad. I think that's the only reason that case happened, was because he made the police look bad.
Yeah, Chauncey, you really don't get concept albums anymore. That seems to be a lost idea.
Yeah.
Like Tommy or Dark Side of the Moon or...
Yeah, The Wall. Like, people fail to realize The Wall isn't an album. It's literally a story, and in order to get it, you have to listen it front to back, Yep. And many songs are deliberately written in a way that when they end, they start the next song.
Yep.
Like, not a lot of people realize this, but the song Another Brick in the Wall, it's actually a compilation of 4 songs.
Well, and it's also Another Brick in the Wall Part 2, because there were 2 others on the album.
Yep. The song that everyone calls Another Brick in the Wall, it's actually a compilation of 4 songs. Another Brick in the Wall Part 1, Best Days of Our Lives, Another Brick in the Wall Part 2, and then Another Brick in the Wall Part 3.
Well, usually they don't put in Part 1 and Part 3 when they play it. Sometimes they'll put in the Best Days of Our Lives to start it.
Yeah.
But it's usually just Part 2 they're playing.
Yeah. I still love all the Pink Floyd memes that came out in 2006 when Trump won, and he was always talking about building the wall. Yeah. The first rule of the US
I remember when the Berlin Wall came down. And man, Roger Waters made hay with that. Tear down the wall.
Yeah. Hey, they should have an East German guy on the wall going, listen up here, people. If you don't eat your meat, you can't have any pudding. According to an interview with Roger Waters,
under the step-down road, we listed to the ball-spun road, and they will be marching up here. And all the stuff he was saying.
Apparently, according to Roger Waters, when he was asked about that, apparently the line, if you don't eat your meat, you can't eat any pudding, apparently that was based off of a real-life argument he heard a teacher have with with a student.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the East German guard sees a little boy trying to climb over the wall. Hey, yes, you! Stand still, laddie! So many people, like to think that Another Brick in the Wall was an anti-education in school song, but according to not Roger Waters, but the other guy, I think it was David Gilmour, said, It's really more about how a lot of times, schools, especially government school, it's not about educating children, it's about keeping them quiet.
Yeah. It's about
And I mean, you
controlling
kind
them
of,
and staunching their creativity, like he does with Pink in the movie, where he's reading out his poems just to embarrass him and then starts yelling at him and smacking him with a ruler. How
or
dare
another
you actually
classic,
do something creative and think for yourself?
or another example about how it's about keeping them, not actually educating them, was because it's in the album, but I think they give it more context in the film, where the teacher yells at a student who got the wrong answer and says, "Wrong, do it again." See, what a proper teacher should do is they should say, "That's the wrong answer. Here's what you did wrong. Here's what you actually need to do." The teacher just goes, "Wrong, do it again."
Yeah, well, that's in the movie too.
Yeah.
Wrong, do it again.
Yeah. Yeah, like if a teacher asks me what's 2 plus 2, and I say 2 plus 2 equals 5, the teacher shouldn't say wrong, do it again. They should say, no, here's what you're actually supposed to do, stuff like that. But his teachers didn't do that. They're just like, nope. And actually, I think that's actually the whole point of the short song, "The Best Days of Our Lives," is to show that the fact of the matter is the teachers, are boring people all, and they just see it as a job.
Well, the point is the teachers have a bad home life and they're taking it out on the kids.
Yeah. Yeah, the schoolmaster's being cruel to the kids because he's getting nagged and abused by his own wife, and so he takes it out on the kids.
Yep.
That's another thing I find so funny at all those, teachers rallies and anti-school choice laws. They're like, this isn't about the money. Teachers are not in it for the money. Then why are you protesting over financial benefits?
We're not in it for the money. Then why do you keep asking for more of it?
Yeah.
All right, we're a minute past 8. So, anyone have any parting thoughts?
No, let you get your rest and hopefully you feel better.
Yeah, thanks. So,
yeah,
I'll wrap it up, and maybe the lag will get your last comments in before we
drink lots of Alka-Seltzer. Remember those old commercials?
I remember those. Plop,
Heck
plop,
yeah.
Fizz, fizz. Oh, what a relief it is.
Oh yeah. Those commercials lied. You clearly see that guy in a catastrophic amount of pain, and then he takes it, and he's all better 30 seconds later. Yet when I take it, I mean, yeah, the pain goes down, but it still hurts.
Yeah.
It just takes the pain down from a 7 to a 5.
Yeah. They can only do so much.
Yeah.
All right, so thanks for watching, everyone. You know what to do. Please subscribe, like all the good stuff, and remember to donate Dopagosity.tv. Keep me doing what I do. We didn't get any super chats tonight, but we had some great chats. So thanks, Chris, for joining me, and thanks for everyone who commented on YouTube, and of course, Fighting Zen over on Rumble. And we'll see you next month. Until then, stay strong.